There's the old saying about that sometimes if the forest is rotten, the best thing is to burn it down so it can grow again. And I think the same thing is happening to the West. The West is rotten and it needs to be burnt down, not literally, of course, and reborn again. Tuesday, January 30th, 2024, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I remember the fall of the Iron Curtain, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and also the fall of the Soviet Union very well. It was back in the late 80s, early 90s. And the interesting thing, or the routine thing about the fall of the Soviet Empire, was that it started from the periphery. And it started, of course, in Eastern Europe. And then it culminated, of course, with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And then by 1991, the Soviet Union did not exist anymore. It collapsed, and the Soviet Union broke up. Um, Eventually, the Warsaw Pact dissolved. The Soviet Union and the Russians, who were, of course, the powerful part of that empire, they withdrew all their troops from Eastern Europe, from East Germany, from everywhere. And NATO, of course, was the dominant force. And there has been over the years speculation that the West, under the leadership, of course, the United States, just like the Soviet Union was under the leadership of Russia, would collapse as well. And sometimes we look at things, we don't look at the forest through the tree, so to speak. And I just realized, I think it was when I was walking Rudy this morning, that it looks like the Western Anglo-American Empire is collapsing. And I think the biggest symptoms of that are these farmers' protests that are going on right now in France, Germany, even in Poland. The other symptom is the fact that Hungary might be sanctioned by the EU, EU country sanctioned by the European Union, which is ridiculous. But it's not surprising, though, because in the past 10, 12 years, countries like Ireland, Greece, and even the UK, when we've had votes on things to do with the EU has never respected those votes. And don't forget, back in 2011, 2012, we had the European sovereign debt crisis, the Southern Europeans. Of course, it was Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Of course, Mario Draghi, who has recently been touted to become president of the European Commission, he saved the day, so to speak. He kicked the can by doing whatever it took when he was president of the ECB to save those countries from collapse, from them defaulting on their debt. But some of you might think, well, that's just the fall of the EU, of Europe. It's not the US or the UK. Well, but believe it or not, the United States depends on the EU, depends on the UK, just like the Soviet Union depended on its satellite states. And I think what we're witnessing could be just the beginning. And as I said earlier, empires collapse from the periphery. And even though we are seeing a lot of trouble in the US, I think things could heat up first here in Europe and even in the UK. And eventually we could see the whole dissolution of this Western empire, Anglo-American empire, if you want to call it. And you might ask, what does the US and the UK have to do with the EU? Well, they have a lot to do with it. The US, of course, has been the major power since World War II. Pax Americana, right? Did you know that it was the CIA and the US that pushed for European integration and for the creation of the EU? And of course, the UK is right behind the US in everything it does. So just because the UK left the EU through Brexit doesn't mean that we're not part of this Western Bloc, Western Empire. And it's interesting that back when the Soviet Union collapsed, there's a Japanese American guy, I forgot his name. He wrote a book and he said, "This is the end of history." I think he was wrong. Um, so, yes, let's have a look at these symptoms, though. I just realized, it feels a little bit like the collapse of the Iron Curtain. So first of all, let's read through the history of the collapse of the Iron Curtain. And of course, I was in my early 20s and I was very interested in all of this because, as I said, I studied international relations and economics. So here we go. I'm taking this from Wikipedia. It says, following a period of economic and political stagnation. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Under Brezhnev and his immediate successors, the Soviet Union decreased its intervention in Eastern Bloc politics. Mikhail Gorbachev decreased adherence to the Brezhnev doctrine, which held that if socialism were threatened in any state, then other socialist governments had an obligation to intervene to preserve it. In favor of the Sinatra doctrine, he also initiated the policies of glasnost, or openness, and perestroika, economic restructuring. A wave of revolutions occurred throughout the Eastern Bloc in 1989. So where do I see the West in terms of this kind of development? Well, I think Ukraine is really important to all of this. And the fact that it looks like if President Trump wins the election in 2024, we could see him abandoning Ukraine or stopping the funding of Ukraine. Ukraine would be history, really. And also NATO. We know that President Trump doesn't like NATO. And NATO, of course, was the opponent of the Warsaw Pact. And you kind of wonder, why did we have to keep NATO if the Warsaw Pact, of course, dissolved back in the day, and all the Russian and Soviet troops withdrew from Eastern Europe? Let's continue, look a little bit more through history here. Speaking at the Berlin Wall on 12th June 1987, Reagan challenged Gorbachev to go further, saying, "General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. If you seek liberalization, come here to this gate." Mr. Gorbachev opened this gate. Mr. Gorbachev teared down this wall. It's a famous speech he made in Berlin, of course. All started like in Poland as well, April 1989. This political party or organization was legalized, as you can see. And yeah, and you go through it, and by 1989, the Berlin Wall fell on the 9th of November. So it was like dominoes falling. And eventually we came to this year, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And it happened December 1991. So by 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed. So it took about 3 years, as you can see here, for the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but it started out in Eastern Europe, in the satellite states of the Warsaw Pact, of the Soviet bloc. So what are we seeing now that makes me think that we could be seeing the collapse of the West? Well, I just realized, I know we had farmers protest in Canada, and don't forget, Canada is part of the West as well. And recently, we've even had Tucker Carlson saying that he was going to liberate Canada. Lech Walesa liberated Poland, so to speak. And I'm not comparing Tucker Carlson with him, but you're getting the same kind of narratives. So here we go. This is in Paris. You know, the farmers in France have said that they're going to starve Paris. They're going to blockade the whole of Paris, and they're not going to allow foodstuffs to get through. Uh, so this is all in France here. They're really going at it in France, but they've also been protesting, of course, in Germany in the last few weeks. You see here Belgian farmers protesting as well. Belgium is part of the Western Empire. Let's keep going through this. Let's see. I'm not sure if this is Greek farmers. I see some Greek writing here, but I'm not sure. Is it Poland? In Poland, so Poland was in the first collapse of the Soviet Union. They could be involved in the collapse of the West as well, which is ironic, right? And even Tucker Carlson is talking about the truckers' protest. So does that matter in terms of finance and economics for us? Of course it does. The fall of an empire means the fall of faith and confidence in that whole empire, and that includes the currency. Half of all transactions, we need to use money or currency, and if the empire collapses and the whole system implodes, it's going to be hectic for a while. Back in the early 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a lot of chaos going through in Eastern Europe and the ex-Soviet Union, Russia. But eventually things got better, but it took a while. We can look at Romania and Ceausescu as well. Back in the days in the 90s, Romania went through a hyperinflation. So it's all going to be very interesting, and it's going to prove that what Mario Draghi did back in 2011, 2012 was just a beginning. He only succeeded in kicking the can down the road. So that's another reason for us to be, of course, with a foot outside the system financially with hard assets, especially gold and silver. And what about who's going to suffer from this? And of course, this is speculation, but sometimes you see things, and that's the way I see it. Well, back in the Soviet Union, or the when the Iron Curtain fell, so to speak, the people who lost out were the people controlling the system, the politicians, the intelligentsia, or the establishment. They lost out a lot. Of course, there were some that were part of that were able to capitalize on the chaos, but also the older elderly people who depended on the system for their pensions, and also the people who depended on the Soviet apparatus, like in the Soviet Union, jobs for the boys and the girls, that all ended. Yes, it created chaos in terms of a lot of arms got into the wrong hands. So I see the same thing in the West. Um, there's a lot of people who depend on this Western socialist fiat currency system that are going to be hurt. But if you've been trying to diversify out of the fiat currency system and protect yourself, I think there will be a lot of opportunities in this chaos. Yes, and it's not going to be nice, in my opinion. And it wasn't nice during the Soviet collapse and the Eastern European collapse, but it's not the end of the world. And it's, yeah, that's how I see it. Uh, I think we're seeing the collapse of the West. It's starting here in Europe, and it's going to end up in the United States. And it could happen very quickly. You saw in the Warsaw Pact, Iron Curtain, Soviet bloc, it took about 2 years for the final collapse. So we could be talking a rough next 2 years, 24, 25, 26. And yes, the US will be at the center of it. And I think Donald Trump will be the Mikhail Gorbachev of this collapse. And who will be the Putin of the United States eventually? I don't know, even if there will be a Putin or a Yeltsin. So that's how I see things. It might sound a little bit far-fetched, but who knows? I could be wrong. But that's how I see the forest. There's a lot of trees out there, but I'm seeing the forest really. And talking about forest, there's the old saying about that sometimes if the forest is rotten, the best thing is to burn it down so it can grow again. And I think the same thing is happening to the West. The West is rotten and it needs to be burnt down. Not literally, of course, and reborn again. So why don't we quickly look at where the markets are this morning? Uh, I am in the UK, of course, and it's 8:34 a.m. London time. So where are we in terms of gold? Well, gold is at 2037. It's up about $4. We've traded up to 2040, and that's quite positive on a weekly basis. Why is that? Well, because the high from last week, and I'll show you here on the chart. This is a weekly chart. The high last week, as you can see here, was 2037.99. So that's why yesterday's high was 2037. The people who manage the price of gold, they yeah, they know these levels, but it looks like they're losing the battle here, or yeah, the battle. And what would gold and silver do if we're really witnessing the collapse of the West? Well, you probably wouldn't be able to get it very easily, and the price wouldn't matter that much, even though I'm looking at it right here. The important thing would be how much can you get for your ounce of silver? How many loaves of bread, so to speak? How many what will a dozen eggs cost? Will it be a shilling, an old silver shilling? Will it be a pre-65 quarter? I think that's what we might be looking at. Of course, it's not going to last forever, this kind of environment. Or if it does, it's not a bad thing. If we go back to real money, silver and gold. Gold, of course, would be used more for bigger transactions. You're not going to go to the supermarket and buy some eggs with an ounce of gold and more stuff. You take your silver. That's why it's important to have silver as well. So back to the prices here. Well, silver is down a little bit today. It has been outperforming gold in the last few trading sessions, but the high is 23.27 and the low is 23.11. The Dow futures, or the Wall Street here, as it says, is down 34 points. NASDAQ is up 13, and S&P is virtually unchanged. So how could we be going through a collapse of the West while these markets are at all-time highs? Well, I think it's more of a reflection of the fact that these currencies that we use in the West are going to be toast soon, and people want to have real assets, be it in commodities or even shares in the stock of companies. That could be it. You know, it happened in Venezuela a few years ago. Their stock market index did really well. Um, anyway, to the currencies, we got sterling down a little bit here, as you can see, 126.89. The euro as well down slightly. The dollar is unchanged versus the yen, and the dollar is unchanged versus the yuan. Let's look at some other currencies here. We've got the Aussie dollar unchanged, just above 66, and the dollar's unchanged versus the Canadian dollar, 135.07. And the Kiwi dollar is up slightly at 61.34. What about commodities? Well, WTI crude is back down a little bit here at 76.62. Brent as well. We'd gotten up to 83 yesterday. We're now at 81.60. High grade copper, that's doing quite well. I hadn't seen a 3.9 figure for a while. So we're at $3.90. It's up a tenth. So approaching that key $4 level. Platinum trading around 930 here, unchanged overnight. So yeah, that's how I see things. Tomorrow, of course, we got the FOMC or Fed announcement. It will move the markets, of course. And there's a lot of speculation that they could announce something that points towards a pivot. We'll have to wait and see. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.